Welcome to our Social Emotional Learning Alliance for Massachusetts webinar on SEL and mental health supports for reopening, recovery, and renewal for COVID-19. I'm Jim Vetter, the Executive Director of the Social Emotional Learning Alliance for Massachusetts. It's wonderful to have so many hundreds of people from all across Massachusetts, some other parts of the United States, even some other countries joining us today for this very important conversation. I'd like to take just a moment as we start off to thank some of our SEL4MA sponsors for enabling us to conduct activities like today's webinar. In particular, I'd like to thank Responsive Classroom, a staunch supporter of SEL in Massachusetts, SEL for Massachusetts, and social emotional learning in general, as Responsive Classroom works to support communities in Massachusetts, across the United States, and really around the world. We would also like to give a special thanks to one of our newest sponsors, Edgenuity, and their Purpose Prep online SEL curriculum. We would also like to thank Panorama, Lions Quest, William James College, Get Psych Sports, Second Step, Aperture Education, the Center for Supportive Schools, Open Circle, Get Real, and Think Give. And we'd also like to thank all of you who have donated or volunteered with SEL4MA over the course of the past year. That together we can really make a big difference around providing effective social emotional learning to all communities across Massachusetts. The Social Emotional Learning Alliance for Massachusetts is the grassroots organization promoting effective social emotional learning in communities across the state. We do that by raising awareness about what effective social emotional learning is and about its positive impacts. We do that by advocating for policy that supports effective social emotional learning. And we do it by bringing people together to connect with each other and with best practice resources in the field. And that's the focus of our webinar today. We have a wonderful panel today with a lot of practical expertise to share. But at the same time, in these unprecedented times, we also know that we are all just figuring this out as we go along. But in this webinar series, we deeply appreciate the opportunity to work with one of our key partner organizations, United Way of Massachusetts Bay and Merrimack Valley. And I'd like to welcome United Way to greet us now.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Kate Shea from United Way. It rhymes. Very excited for everyone to be here. I think that this conversation is important and critical to our own learning and development. So very excited for the panelists to share their perspectives, both representing the out-of-school time space as well as the in-school space and people that transcend both. It's my pleasure to also introduce my colleague, Danielle Kim.
Thanks, Kate, and thank you everyone for joining in today. I'm really delighted for this conversation. We know that this has been a short week, but it's also, I want to take a moment to recognize that this has been a traumatic and deeply triggering week for many folks, given the experience of seeing yet another Black man publicly lynched this week, and also recognizing that this global pandemic is having a disproportionate impact on many of the communities that we serve as well as ourselves. So I just want to take a moment to recognize that in the spirit of also tuning into the mental health needs of all of us on this call today. So thank you for being here. As Kate mentioned, I serve as the Public Policy Director at the United Way, and I just want to thank all of you for joining in and for checking in with the families and the young people that you serve, because I know that this is also likely a deeply traumatic time for them as well. And when we think about the policies and practices that are needed to move our communities to recovery and renewal, it's really important, I think, to recognize that we should not be striving to quote unquote get back to normal, because what we considered normal did not work for so many of the families and young people that we were working with day in and day out. And in fact, the systems and policies that were in place perhaps were designed to exploit many communities communities of color, as well as low-income folks, folks that are working parents, and young people that are multilingual. So I just want to acknowledge that and thank you for what you're doing to reach out to families and young people during this time of great need. And I'm delighted that all of you are part of this conversation and dialogue. The only way that this recovery process will be truly inclusive and equitable is ensuring that folks like all of you are raising your voices and working to demand a stronger system that works for everyone. So I want to just, again, welcome all of you to be part of this conversation. I'm really eager to hear from all of you and hear from the panelists about all the ideas on what we can do to make sure that SEL as well as mental health is really at the core of what recovery and renewal looks like. So with that, I'll pass it back off to Jen.
Great. Thank you so much, Danielle. So let's get a chance to introduce our panel, or really to have our panel introduce themselves. So I'm going to be calling on our panel right now, and panelists will just introduce themselves, giving their name, their organization, and a very brief description of that organization, starting with Shonda.
Good morning, everyone. My name is Shonda Lewis. I'm happy to be here with you all. I'm the Program Director for Social and Emotional Learning at Boston After School and Beyond, which is an out-of-school time intermediary in the city. And in that role, I co-direct Boston's participation with Boston Public Schools in a national research initiative called the Partnerships for Social and Emotional Learning Initiative.
Great. Welcome, Shonda.
I also see a lot of folks that are participants in that initiative and working as youth workers and educators in the initiative on with us today. So welcome, tribe.
Fantastic. And Deb.
Hi, it's great to be here. My name's Deb Anserlian. I'm the Executive Director of Girls Inc. of Boston in Lynn. We serve girls ages 5 to 18 in in-school and out-of-school programs, inspiring girls to be strong, smart, and bold. Great to be here.
We can certainly use a lot of strong, smart, and bold these days. Yeah, thanks, Deb. And Shelley.
Thanks, Jim. I'm Shelley Berman. I'm the Superintendent of Schools in Andover, Massachusetts. And for those who are not familiar with Andover, it's a community north of Boston. It's about 6,000 students, pre-K to 12. And it's wonderful to be here and see everybody. And to see the dedication to social emotional learning is really a great acknowledgement. And to see that we have 300 and almost 30 people on this is very exciting.
Thanks, Shelley. And Emily.
Hi, my name is Emily Ullman. I'm the Director of Community Engagement and Partnerships for the Salem Public Schools, also north of Boston, a gateway city in a small urban district. I work primarily connecting city to schools and vice versa, and focusing on wraparound supports for kids and families. And also work at Salem State, and I've done a lot of sort of arts and social justice in the past, and I'm excited to be here.
And we are excited to have all of you. So we have a wonderful panel. We're going to start the conversation with all 4 of our panelists in just a few minutes, and have a kind of main chunk of conversation with these 4. And then in the end section of our webinar, we're really going to focus in on a conversation with Shelley and Deb, really representing those kind of perspectives of out of school time, in school, and the kind of the combination of both. But before we get into some conversation with our panelists, there's a question I want to toss out to our panelists, but really to everybody here on the webinar. So I'm just inviting everybody to think for a moment, and then participants go ahead and type in the chat. But what would you say, what is one key concern or consideration that you have right now around social and emotional well-being as you're thinking about the next phase, whatever comes next for your organization, your out of school time organization, your school district? So, and we know that there may be many considerations that you're thinking about, but for right now, let's just start with one. In the course of the conversation, we're going to talk about a lot of different things, but just inviting everybody to just go ahead, think about that for a minute, and then go ahead and just type down in the chat. What is one key consideration that you're thinking about around social emotional well-being as you think about what's next in your operations? Okay, so Rocio talks about safety, peace of mind. Talks about screening and tiered supports, how that's going to work. We have people talking about relationships, how relationships are going to work. Effects of trauma, folks are talking about. Yeah, thinking about how do you build community at this point, and the level of anxiety that many families are feeling. That this might raise things like phobias. People are bringing up issues of equity. How's that going to work? What are coping skills that can help? Folks are worried about stress and the level of stress that might even be toxic stress. People experiencing PTSD. Folks are talking about the kind of the stress on staff as well. So thinking about the young people we work with, but also thinking about all of us. Thinking about the impact on families. And how do we get back to something that feels like normal? If we're going to be in a stage where maybe we're going to get together but have masks, how do we help that feel like a kind of normal and supportive environment? Folks are coming back again to the idea of relationships being important. Yeah, folks are wondering about how is this going to feel socially when maybe we'll be at a stage where we won't be able to welcome everybody back in person. We'll have to do this in some sort of phased way. And what does that feel like? People talking about safety, about anxiety, about the sense of normalcy. But, okay, so, and feel free to keep typing in the chat that as we go all through this webinar, this is a conversation among all of us. So feel free to keep typing your comments right now, and that any kind of comments or questions that you have at any point during the webinar, feel free to type those in the chat. So I'm wondering actually for each of you, that as you're thinking about this really uncertain time, where all of us are trying to figure out what comes next, perhaps waiting for more guidance about what comes next, but what are some of the things that you're thinking about in terms of the kind of key social and emotional concerns? So Deb, over to you.
Sure. So very similar to what folks in the chat room are saying, you know, I think that as we get ready, so we're going to reopen our school-age childcare program in about a month or so, we're hoping. So thinking about that, you know, it's really interesting. It was all about the logistics, you know, do we have enough PPE? How are people coming in and out of the building? And it's really, the real work is how are we welcoming the girls back? What is that going to look like? How are we helping to support staff through all of that? I think it is, you know, it in some ways, it's what we don't know. And each child, and for us, each girl, as we have seen through this process, will have individual things that we have to help them through. So yeah, there's definitely a lot going on there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And Shelley, what are some of the kind of key concerns that you're thinking about?
Well, as I look to the future, first of all, we're looking at how do we create an effective closure that brings students together, teachers together in a way, even if it's virtual, that in a way honors the relationships that they've had and the connection that they've been able to establish. I think people have gone above and beyond in every school, I'm sure, in Massachusetts and around the country, to try to reach out to the students that were in their classrooms, and to retain that connection and that relationship with them. I know I was speaking with one of our actually a third grade teacher the other day, and she actually has visited every single one of her students' homes, stayed in the in the driveway or out on the sidewalk, and just said hello and a quick exchange. But that kind of connection is so vitally important. And for many of our students, and particularly in urban environments, we may have lost touch with them given the moves that they've made or the circumstances that they are facing. They really are feeling that sense of isolation. So the reaching out that we've done is really critical. But the other concern that's on my mind is, how do we reopen? And how do we reopen probably after a summer where most summer activities have been canceled, where the after-school programs have done the best job they can to sustain the relationships that they've developed, that the summer programs are attempting to do something virtually. And then as we go back into the start of the school year, I do not assume that we're going to have a normal start. I think we have to be realistic that we're not walking into a circumstance where we're going to open the doors and everything's going to be back to normal. Whether it's just that people are wearing protective equipment, and as you know, young children have real challenges with protective equipment. How do we manage that? And when you're talking to an adult with a mask, it's one thing, but when you're talking to a child and so much of our facial features, communicate about so much about emotions, it's really a challenge. So assuming that we are going to open in some way, how do we manage that opening, and how do we establish relationships when we still may need to have some students remote, some teachers remote, and frankly, possibly some of our school week done remotely?
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Shelley. And that Nancy's talking about in the chat about the importance, as you folks are talking about too, that of maintaining and continuing relationships with both students and families in this really unprecedented time. And as Shelley was mentioning, that lots of folks in out-of-school time organizations and in schools, the staff have been are showing amazing heroism, going above and beyond to be able to keep those connections going, even when they're dealing with their own family situations in the midst of all this. So Emily, I'm wondering, as you're thinking about, again, just some of the couple of the key considerations that you're thinking about in Salem at this point.
For me, my mind, and where I sort of sit on a non-pandemic world is really about not the irony, but the sharp light that this pandemic has shown on what I think we all knew before, but it's really hard to ignore now. And that's sort of, while we're forced to stay apart physically, it's sort of the interdependence and connection that we have and reliance we have on our communities and families to support social emotional health and learning for our kids is the thing that keeps screaming to me. So we've never had parents engage in this way. And we've never been as reliant or as obviously dependent on them. We always knew they were the first teacher and really important, but now you can't ignore it. I think that's going to move our educator mindset, hopefully in a direction where we come to recognize the power and capacity of our families and our community, and that we can't do this alone. We couldn't do education before alone, but we certainly can't do it now with the food needs and just care needs and rent needs and all the things that we know exist, sort of the interdependence, and how do we build a structure that everybody contributes to the same thing for all of us is really top of mind for me.
Thanks, Emily. And Paolo in the chat is really echoing that, says to you, amen. I agree with that. Interconnection has come to light. And you're talking about that kind of interconnection that we can only respond to situations like this. And it's really become clear that what many have already known is that without having this interconnection, sort of as Danielle was talking about earlier, that our normal situation, as you were, when we weren't having strong connections between out-of-school time, families, schools, that we weren't really serving every young person in our communities well. And Shonda, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about that through the work that you've been doing with the Partnerships for Social Emotional Learning initiatives in Boston, of the importance of those kind of connections. How have you been seeing that?
Sure. Yeah. I mean, I think so. The first thing that comes to mind for me is adults. How are we supporting adults across the board, right? That's parents, and for us, out of school time educators and teachers and principals, because we're all being traumatized, right? Like this is a traumatic event for all of us, and traumatic events, as Danielle mentioned, that are happening this week. We're being triggered. How are we supporting, in my role, I'm thinking about how do we support the adults that serve young people, that support young people? How do we provide the support to them for them to be able to understand their trauma dissect it, understand how they're triggered, and be able to be present and effective supports to young people so they can get through this as well, and we can understand and be normal. In the work that we do within the PSEL World Partnerships for Social Emotional Learning Initiative, we call it PSEL for short. For the past 3 years, we've been working with 7 schools in their out of school time partners to really think about how it is that we provide this holistic support to young people. How do we align practice across the entire learning day? And I think that set us up for a bit of success, if you will, if that's what we want to call it, in this moment, where there's communication happening with adults. There's structures for adults that support holistically across the entire learning day, to be able to talk about how best to support young people and what are the social emotional strategies, social emotional learning strategies and development strategies that can really help them get through this moment. So yeah, connectedness, I think, is extremely important, especially now. And, you know, I think adults really communicating across the spaces in all the ways that they support young people, and thinking about, you know, we're talking, as Emily was talking about, the importance of parents in this moment and how we really need to do a good job of reaching across the aisle and making sure they're part of those conversations and a part of those structures as well.
Thanks. And Shonda, you were talking about how some of the connections and structures that were already in place are being used now. And I'm certainly hearing that from people in out-of-school time organizations, in schools and districts all across Massachusetts, that whatever folks had in place, they are really using now. And wherever there were gaps, folks are really seeing those in a much, kind of heightened way at this point. And I'm wondering for others, that how are you finding, what have you been leveraging of what you already had in place that you're finding useful at this point now? So, so Shelley, I'm wondering if you have some examples of that.
Sure. Well, there are a number of systems that we put in place pretty quickly. Andover has a strong social emotional learning program. We've been working at that for many years. And we felt that it was critically important to sustain that aspect of the work that we were doing. And in fact, at the very beginning, that was our orientation, was to say, let's worry less about academics. Let's focus on the connection we retain with our students, sustain that connection, those relationships. And so just a couple of simple examples. At the elementary level, we use responsive classroom, and we have morning meetings and closing meetings every day. So we retain that, and we continue to try to do that virtually. We have advisory programs at the middle school and at the high school, and we've continued to try to retain those as well. We've built in time for teachers to connect, and much more time for teachers and administrators to connect. So that I think, Shonda's point about we have to take care of the adults, that's a very important piece of this work. One of the, and I'll come back to tensions at the end, but then in addition, we have had we have social workers instead of school counselors. We have, except at the high school where there are school counselors, but our psychologists, our school counselors at the high school level, our social workers have all become a mental health team. And we have, when we can't reach a student or have difficulty reaching a family and know that something is going on, our social work team comes into action and reaches out and tries to make a connection. We have had a number of circumstances where that connection has been extraordinarily valuable. So we've realigned our resources. We've said, let's devote those resources to creating connections. The one thing that I want to surface in this is that, these times, as best as we're trying to do this, are tense for all of us. They raise issues that are uncomfortable. We're all experiencing issues of having, whether it's friends, parents, could be our children are experiencing illness and sometimes loss. And we can't lose sight of that. There have been so many in Massachusetts who have lost family members that and lost without the ability to have closure in the traditional sense, that it raises significant tensions for us and anxieties. And so whether that's within children or with adults, I think we have to, continue to look at how that raises issues of anger, and upset, family disruption, and the consequences. So we have tried to retain our support for families when we know that something's going on. And that has been a critical aspect of the work that we've been doing.
Thanks, Shelley. And I see that Pedro in the chat was really echoing what you were saying about that we need to worry about maintaining long-lasting relationships over producing work as usual. That these are not normal times. Our expectations need to change with the times.
If I can add one thing, Jim, to this, and that is that there are tensions within that, and that is that in Andover and many other communities, parents are expecting, they are not educators. And particularly for young children, they're finding it really challenging to maintain some sense of organization around instruction. And they look to us to say, please give us more. Do more video conferencing, give us more lessons, take over, help us. And you realize that schools not only serve an educational function, but a childcare function. And there are many parents who say, I need to go back to work. I cannot support my child's education. And how do we balance that and support families at the same time is I think a fairly challenging issue for us.
Mm-hmm. And Sarla says in the chat that academic learning has suffered, but if the child is not socially and emotionally equipped to deal with what's going on, none of that matters. So that's about sort of how do we adjust our expectations, knowing that both of those are important concerns. The academic concerns are important, the safety concerns are important, and the social and emotional health and well-being concerns are important. So I'm wondering how this plays out when we're thinking about an organization like Girls Inc. of Lynn, that where you're not just looking at what's going to be happening in September, but you're looking at what's going to be happening in just a few weeks. But, and I'm wondering, so what are some of the things that you've been drawing on to be able to provide social emotional supports in this time?
Yeah, so the first thing is the staff. We have an amazing staff, and they have really stepped up to the plate and have been rock stars about through all of this. I think at the core at Girls Inc. That every conversation that we have the girl at the center of that conversation, her needs. So everything that we do is framed around that. So we have, when it first started, March 17th, when we left the building, again, we knew we needed to be connected. We used some of the systems that we had in place, whether that was, email texting. When that didn't work, we started to write notes and letters to families just to make sure that we had that connection with them. I think that, the more that we do that, it has, it's really engaged the families, and we always had a strong connection with the girls and the families, and we have continued to do that. And it's different now in the ways that we're doing it, but we continue to do that. Yeah.
And I'm curious, both with Shonda and with Emily, that I know that in your work, as with everyone here, but that in your work, you've really been developing sort of strategies and systems for connecting different domains of the community to provide this kind of support. And I'm interested in what you see as the strength of making those connections between different kinds of organizations that support young people. So starting with Emily.
Yeah, I think that what we've relied most heavily on during this crisis is certainly the systems of support that we began building long before this happened, and that were really tested right now. So that includes sort of internal school district systems, around our City Connects model of whole child support, and also working really intentionally with the city over the last few years to recognize that inequity thrives when you don't build systems that intentionally undermine it, right? So that when we rely on who knows who and who gets what, it always ends up with the same kids and families losing out. So we've been really intentional about sort of equity-centered systems to focus on how do we access all kids in a realistic way and a systematic, programmatic way, so that we're not continually to overserve some and neglect others. So those systems across the city, including out-of-school partners, food, housing, mental health, healthcare, all of those relationships and sort of access points we had begun to define over years of work and trust building and all the things that happen in order to build systems. And then they became sort of essential as we moved into this crisis. But a lot of the backbone was there. I think an umbrella under which we could begin to put our COVID response. So that's been crucial for us.
And Emily, as you're talking about a system for whole child support, can you tell a little bit more sort of what does that system look like, and how is that system different from how supports get provided if there isn't a kind of systematic process in place?
Yeah, are you talking on the school side, Jim? Would you like to hear more school side?
Well, I'm thinking when you were talking about that kind of school connect model.
Yeah, right. So our City Connects model out of BC is one I won't get into great detail about, but it's a fantastic whole child support where we do whole school, every kid in all of our pre-K to 8 buildings gets reviewed every year. Not just in academics, but in social emotional learning, in family and stability, and in health and wellness. So we have sort of holistic profiles of kids that we work to maintain and keep clear that there's a hub, a position that's a counselor, licensed counselor, that's a hub of student services that sort of understands the programmatic, holistic nature of supports for kids and helps to act as a center hub of that wheel. And that includes and extends beyond the school walls and through my position in our work to think about the same for the city, so that it's not just the schools providing all services for kids, but we really rely on recognize, celebrate, and then aim high for all of our city organizations, that we rely on them all the time for, 20% of kids' waking hours are spent in school. So we know that it's essential for all of these things in our city across our community to support families, from immigration to housing support. And we recognize that the school district plays a central role in that, but that the bird's eye view for supports is also essential. So we kind of, that City Connects model extends through me and my position to be a bridge between schools and all of the resources in the community to help define need, set ambitious collective goals together, measure our outcomes, and then sort of focus our collective attention on the same goal, so that we're not, as we do without those systems, all running in often similar directions, to many times duplicate efforts and needs, and while we're inadvertently neglecting others, compete for the same funding sources, reach out to the same families, and not really understand what the other hand is doing. So we're trying to make those more of a holistic picture, so we can identify gaps in our support structure and then challenge each other to meet those needs and fill in those gaps together, rather than all of us fighting for the same access point.
So being able to coordinate that, and so I'm hearing two things in what you're talking about with these City Connects model and the work that you're doing. That one is the piece about making sure that all partner organizations, all kind of partner entities, are really talking with each other, and are kind of a team together. So that folks have been talking about in the chat about different ways of reaching out to families. Folks have talked about creating something like a Google Voice line to be able to then reach out by text or by phone without using one's own personal phone number. And we've also heard other folks talking about, well, sometimes that there's the school reaching out, or multiple people in the school and school district reaching out, that other folks in out-of-school times organizations also reaching out, and that some families initially were saying, this is actually a little too much reaching out. Although many thought better that than have anybody get missed. But you're talking about, if we can do things to then coordinate so that we know sort of who is getting the supports, who's actually been reached, who are we hearing back from, and that as you're talking about, sort of even over the course of regular times, that if there's also not a systematic way for understanding what's the current state of each young person, and what do they need in any of a variety of areas, then there can be some staff members that are particularly attuned to some issues and are going to spot those and help get the help to that particular young person. There are some young people who just present in ways that people can sort of see the need more easily, and can then get, whether it's getting connected to a strong out of school time program to support their kind of interests and help their social connections, or whether it's a young person who's got some kind of social, emotional, or mental health need that needs a little extra support from the community.
Yeah, so in our school, that's the system, and then we're working to build the city to school level. So our mayor's, pushed really hard for sort of citywide perspectives on kids. We launched the Salem Together initiative in response to COVID that does a very similar thing, that there's a bridge between entities so that we can centralize and identify needs together, and then from that spot fan out to say, how do we meet that need? How do we connect with the pantry? How do we connect with healthcare, with our, with our mental health providers? Yeah, so really trying to expand that model and idea to think about the whole city as an entity that is needed right now more than ever to support and wrap our metaphoric arms around each kid and family right now.
Mm. And Shonda, with your work with Partnerships for Social Emotional Learning Initiatives in Boston, that I'm wondering, sort of, where are you seeing the advantages of being able to coordinate what's happening out of school time and in school time? How can that be valuable? Why is that important?
I think in this moment, what comes to mind for me as a strength that we've been working on is this focus on providing consistency and connectedness for young people through practice. So, we've been working with all 7 sites and their partners, their OST partners, to align practice around SEL throughout the entire learning day, so that students are experiencing, as they walk through their day from before school, during school, and into after school, and then even beyond, sharing practices with families, that they're experiencing some level of consistency, seamlessness around how they engage in social emotional learning. And, I think that has helped us in this moment, because, in my opinion, I guess it's, and I'm sure there's research behind this, right, that when you have some level of normalcy or routine, it helps you get through the unpredictability of everything that's happening around us. And so we have, every site has like we have an aligned practice, we call it. So there's 3 curricula that we're working with: Second Step, Open Circle, 2 of the partners for SEL4MA, and then also Mind Up. So each site has one aligned practice that, for example, with Second Step, it's the lanyards, the calm down steps, and the problem solving strategies, and every educator, we're working to make sure that everyone that works with students from that site, is trained in using that protocol with young people, so that they're experiencing the same way in which to engage in, regulation or building self-awareness or getting through triggering moments. That's an example. I mean, I think it's also too really helpful for adults, right? We have across all 7 sites, so in addition to each site having their own curriculum and then their own one aligned practice, we've been working with CASEL, a collaborative for academic, social, and emotional learning, throughout this initiative. And we use their 3 signature practices, which is basically, I think it's a welcoming, ritual, engaging practice, optimistic closure. It's opening, engaging, middle, and, closing in connectedness and just awareness. And And from there, you know, it allows us like level of routine, no matter what's happening, we just have those three components in whatever we do, whether it's a meeting with the system level team on how to provide the best support for sites, or it's a meeting at the site level between in-school educators and out-of-school time partners trying to figure out how best to support young people, or it's a, you know, it's a moment during swimming during, you know, the Boys and Girls Club, or let's see, Boston Scores lesson or activity. So students are, I think just from that, in that moment, having these like practices that we, you know, are all using, it allows for some level of consistency, and then also just allowing us to find ways to connect with young people, make sure there's a space for their voices to be heard, and also for adults to have that level of consistency and connectedness and opportunity to, you know, to just share how they're feeling, you know, through all of this. Yeah.
Yeah. So that's interesting, Shonda. So you're talking about this idea about consistency, connectedness, connection. That so that as a young person, and that sounds like that kind of resonates with some things that Emily and Shelley and Deb were saying too about, you know, as a young person moves through their day, if they get a kind of consistent support. So if I've been learning in a classroom about how to take 3 deep breaths to calm down, and how to go through a series of steps to solve problems well, that includes really looking at the other person's perspective, that then when I move into an out of school time setting, if the staff there have also had the support and the training and so on to know those key skills or practices, then that staff is able to then support that young person in the same way. And that sort of links to families as well. And some communities are doing that as well, so that sort of everybody gets to be, have the same resources to be able to provide, that can provide a kind of seamless experience of support for the young person over the course of the day. So I'm interested that, you know, as you're thinking about those kinds of supports, that I'm wondering, Shelley, how are you seeing that working? About, you know, you mentioned some of those kind of key practices that have kind of kept things going, and I'm wondering how else you're seeing that.
Well, you know, first let me just say that the points that Emily and Shonda were making about sort of wrapping around our students and our families and using all the community resources are really critical points. You know, we really can't do this alone, and there's got to be a lot of partnerships within the community and the town or city. You know, we have a Andover Youth Center, our Y, a number of our town recreation programs. We have really had to come together in this and say, how can we best support families? And I think that that's a point that is vitally important. There's another theme that I think is critical in my mind for sustaining that support. And it's beyond the individual relationships. You know, when the value, I was watching the chat, and, you know, a comment about Second Step, and, you know, the Open Circle Second Step are really great social skill development programs. And we are using both actually in different schools as sort of an instructional component. But the one thing that makes all of this work is, we talked about relationships, but it's more than relationships. It's the community that you build in a classroom and the community that you build in a school. It's that sense that we are together. We are a larger unit than just our individual connections, that we are surrounded by a supportive group of people, that we are sustained by that group. I mean, the reason we have been implementing responsive classroom and actually advisory programs is that it does create that sense of community. It is actually critical to have that sense of community. And in this circumstance, we need to continue to think about how we sustain the sense of community that's in the classroom. we've done a lot of wonderful things. Of, for example, our teachers got together in at practically every one of our schools, and have done videos, somewhat silly videos that you send to the students, and you say it might be a dance video where there's a song and all the faculty are dancing, and we send that out to all of our students. It may be that we send messages or even letters. I mean, some of our staff, we're finding hard to reach students online. We've sent letters and little little things that would make children and families happy, in a sense, and see the connection. But it's sustaining the sense of community is critically important.
And Alec Wyeth in the chat says, yes, dead on, Shelley. So there we go.
Well, Alec is a friend, so he's throwing me a line. That's all.
There we go. And I see that in the chat, folks are talking about that Mitch Lyons from SEL4MA is talking about parents in the community coming together and having a kind of collaborative effort among adults at home to be able to support each other and connect with other kind of community connections or services. And that, and you were talking, and Shelley was just talking about the kinds of things like advisory that helps people connect. We have some people in the chat saying, this is all good that this might be happening in the schools, but what's happening even in the summer? So Emily, I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about the kind of the mentoring program work and what that might be happening.
Yeah, so we're working to plan for this summer like everybody else is, with, our eyes wide open and all the best intentions that we can muster. But we are right now, and it depends, Massachusetts is going to issue some guidance on Monday, so they say. So maybe everything's out the window, but our plan is to think holistically about kids and about the community again. So from that perspective, we're working on a couple new programs, and a couple recurring that are adapting. So our regular programs over the summer, grant funded through 21st Century, or other programs that we sort of set aside in our budget as a district, focus on some of our high needs kids, and really focusing and recruiting and retaining and supporting kids that we know would benefit from summer programs, project-based learning, and all the fun stuff we do in the summer. This year, we're continuing to do that with lots of less kids in person and lots of different strategies for connecting and engaging. We're also adding sort of a middle tier for kids that we'd love to be enrolled in something, but we're not sure. We can't have them in person. And that is our sort of mentor program, where we're assigning adults across the district who want to work over the summer to small groups of 5 students, in the hopes of building connections between kids with adults, and sort of a trajectory, SEL trajectory, as a continuation and bridge from our SEL curriculum during the school year. We're also relying on and engaging our community partners, so that kids involved in programs that may not have anything to do with the school district are still accessing those supports, and still have access to school expertise should they need support academically to help kids engage in that, and social emotionally with our mental health experts, and making sure those connections are clear, providing our community partners with the curriculum we're using, with training that we give our teachers, and acting as a resource, because our kids aren't just with us. They're with lots of partners, and they do a wonderful job too. And we want to value that and push kids wherever they're safest and most comfortable, wherever families want to engage, we want them to be. So we're trying to have sort of an open mind in that way. And then also working on how do we engage transitioning back, providing some assessments, not in a scary way, but in a thoughtful, social, emotional, and academic way to help on-ramp us back into the fall, so that teachers can start with as much information as possible and differentiate right out of the gate for kids and families.
So interesting, you were talking, that Emily was just talking about how that any one young person is not just with one organization in the community, that not just with the local out of school time organization, not just with the schools, that moves in many different settings. And Shonda, I'm wondering that in your work, I'm wondering what you found is the value of those different staff members or different organizations sharing with each other about the young people that they're working with? How can that be valuable?
Sure. So, you know, what we've been able to observe through having the adults who support students throughout the day, throughout different spaces, come together and communicate with each other, is the impact on young people, right? So, you know, it's so interesting. They'll come together. I've witnessed this happen, and you know, they'll end up, you know, talking about. So, say the Boys and Girls Club is talking about how Johnny is doing so well in their program and really loves, you know, the art portion of after school, and you know, you have Miss Johnson that's like, really, Johnny? You know, I have so, you know, I'm having a hard time with him, and you know, during science class, like, you know, that's so interesting that he, you know, I have to send him out all the time. You know, and then they have this conversation around how they can best support this young person be successful in both spaces. And then also to see that with the kids, with the young people, we work at the elementary level, and to see that happen, you know, when a Boys and Girls club staff person is able to say, oh, you know, I heard Miss Johnson told me that you did really well in science today, and that, you know, you're working on a science project. You know, Miss Johnson? Really? You know? But that is just, I mean, there's just a higher level of support that I think that students feel, and accountability, right? It's like, well, I don't want to let any side down. And if I enjoy one space, you know, and they're talking to the other space, I think it just allows for students to be able to see that there is a support, there's a tribe that's supporting them. And for us, you know, we're consistently working on how it is that we then really pull in families into that space as well, so that there's just this full level of support for the child during, you know, all moments of the day, that is connected, and they see that communication. So yeah, I mean, I think, you know, we've seen the benefit of that, and this moment is calling for us to be able to really zoom in. Okay, now how do we effectively really, you know, bring in parents and families to that energy. Yeah, it is, and you know, we're still working on how this is a research initiative, right? So I don't have full answers, and I can't say that it's research vetted, but hopefully we'll get there, right? And this will be something that, you know, stories that we could share and best practices that will start to emerge, and that can influence how it is that we engage with young people and provide that level of support to them.
Mm-hmm. Well, and it certainly makes intuitive sense that kind of continuity, connectedness about sort of all young people in the child's life, that knowing about that child, being able to present a kind of a caring presence, and also doing all the kind of concrete, practical things that we need to do to have the resources available to meet that child's needs. And that, you know, by having that kind of coordinated effort, sometimes that also surfaces where we as a community are falling short, where the resources may not be there to be able to support a young person's needs. And I'm wondering, Emily, that, you know, when you were talking about that being able to, as we're thinking about return, whether it's return to a summer program or whether it's return to school, that being able to do a kind of a check-in for each young person to sort of see what their needs might be. Can you talk a little bit more about, I know that this is all, we're figuring this all out as we go along here.
Yeah, it's all half imaginary, yes. Yes, it's a new comfort level with gray space, which I thought I was good at, but I'm clearly not. Yeah, we as a school district are sort of expanding on our whole student support mindset that we've been working on for years through the City Connects model and our own shifting mindsets to think about kids as whole kids and families as whole families, and proactively trying to assess and tier needs so that we can better serve them before they become crises. And that's sort of been our mantra for a few years. And we're sort of doing a steroids version of that this year. We're hoping to roll out, hoping, and that we don't have the logistics worked out or the people hired or but the idea and the sentiment is to kind of help families transition back and assess where kids are, not just their reading level, which is important to help figure out how to best support them in small groups and interventions in the fall. But on top of that, sort of where are they situated in their social emotional health and wellness? How can we sort of screen for some flags that we may want to put further supports in place for? And also, how do we, a new set of questions, how does remote learning affect you and your family? How are you able to access the content? We've done surveys during this closure to see, or we're doing a survey to see, does the morning meeting with your whole class work the best? Does a small group, what are the barriers to you accessing? We know that if you don't have internet or you don't have a device, and we've been working on that, but more deeply than that, what are the family barriers to you being able to participate and really engage in learning? So we're hoping to do these sort of transition appointments for all of our kids over a period of time. And ramp up our usual whole school review to get sort of a whole picture of kids and families, and then better plan, not just for your literacy instruction intervention, which is important, but now we have what's our differentiated structure to meet families when they're virtual, to know that there's 4 kids in the house who are all sharing a device, to figure out how do we, you're anxious about screens, or whatever it is. We're sort of putting together as complete a profile as we can, so that we can have as much information to meet kids' needs and build relationships from a place of honesty and vulnerability and trust and all the things we know kids and educators need to learn.
Well, thank you so much, Emily and Shonda. And we're going to continue to dive a little deeper also with Shelley and Deb. But when you were talking about those, Emily was just talking about being able to kind of survey and get a sense of what the kind of needs might be. Shelley, I'm wondering if you can talk a little bit about how you're approaching that in Andover.
That's a really good question. And I think we often think about how we can reach out, serve, connect. But one of the most important things we can do is listen. Early on, one of our teachers created an activity, a high school teacher, actually frankly a biology teacher, sent out an activity and said, ask students to write a poem or a short essay about my journey through COVID-19. And the responses that she had were just extraordinary. And I took that theme and extended it to the entire district and said, here's a suggestion. We need to be listening to our students. What are they experiencing? How will we be able to surface that in a really personal way so that we can address it? And I've kept a couple of the poems. I've read actually all of the essays that came in there. I've been reading others' work that students have been doing, but I think we have to open up this as a conversation with students and not just see it as, we're going to provide social emotional learning, in terms of the lessons we offer or the even the morning meetings and the structures, but to spend time listening. And in terms of that, we've been working pretty closely with Panorama Education to issue surveys. We sent one to parents early on in this to ask how this was working for them. This week, we've been surveying teachers and students to ask how this has worked for them. And then next week, or maybe within the next 2 weeks, we will survey parents again to say, how has this changed? And in the meantime, I continue to meet with our PTO presidents to try to get a sense of what's going on in the schools. I've encouraged our principals to continue meeting with their PTO, and even if it's virtually, they can't meet physically, but to have a virtual meeting and to hear what's going on in families, and so that we're still retaining some of the connective structures that we have maintained in our schools, but that tap the voice of families and that tap the voice of our students so that we can better understand what they're experiencing. And it's a range. I mean, it's really a range of things, and it's a range of emotions, from anger to, I can't tell you how many emails I received in the early weeks that we weren't doing enough academically, that we weren't challenging students, that we were spending too much time connecting and not enough time teaching. And that's, you can understand that, and you have to respect that perspective. And then we have heard from parents that this is overwhelming to them, that the support is very challenging, to try to educate when they're not educators, to understand the nuances of math as we teach it now when they never had that experience, to understand literacy in a way that we're approaching it now. And the frustrations that emerge around that. And we have to pay attention to that, acknowledge it, and acknowledge that we are in partnership right now. This is challenging. We're going to get through this. I think there's a message. I've communicated with my parents and my teachers more in the last 3 months than I have probably in the last 4 years. I send out multiple messages a week to just say, here's where things are, and here's how what I'm hearing, and I know that these questions are emerging. We have to maintain that conversation. The other thing that has not come up in our conversation, and it's something that I believe is really critical, at a time when we're all challenged, when children feel somewhat helpless and somewhat hopeless, if they're watching the news at all, the accumulating death toll is just very frightening, and just the shadow of having this over us for the next possible year, maybe even if it's until the new year, that's still a very long time for children. And how do we get them engaged in something constructive? And so we've been looking for opportunities to have our students do things for the community. Initially, we had students creating masks. We have an innovation lab at the high school, and they've actually been building face shields for medical professionals. Others have collected food and made food available. I think one of the things that emerges in all of this, and I believe that Danielle talked about it at the very beginning, is you realize the inequities in our system, and you realize that we can do something about that, and we have to do something about that, and we have to provide for those in need. And so having our students enter that and provide support has been really critical in this, to think of this holistically, and to think about voice and participation and engagement, so that people are not just seen as you're at home and you're isolated, but you are engaged and you're still a connected part of this community, and you can not only have a voice, but you can help others.
And that whole question about the whole topic of youth voice, youth leadership, seeing a lot in the chat, people talking about that, how important that is to listen. And I know that whole focus around acknowledging the strength of young people as leaders is a key part of what you do, Deb. Can you talk a little bit about how that's coming to the fore at this point?
Sure, yeah. So I definitely agree with the listening, and and that shows up in so many different ways. It's listening to staff and to the girls and to our families. Our program is built around youth leadership. We are getting the next generation of girls ready for leadership, and I think one day girls are going to rule the world. I'll give you one example. One of our young peer leaders early on emailed me, and she said, I want to do something, and this was at the end of March. So she has been doing a COVID ed webinar, Zoom chat every Friday afternoon at 3:00. And it's a combination of both staff and girls, and they get to talk about what's going on and how COVID is affecting them, whether that is mental health issues or, what's true and not true. So she really took an incredible leadership role in that. And I think that listening to the girls, you know, hearing their voices and what's going on for them really has helped us to set the course on what's next and how we're going to do programming in the next way. You know, we were very successful in, you know, early on in engaging volunteers, our mentoring programs, and it gave in all three of our programs, you know, the younger girls and the older girls, and it gave the girls an opportunity to feel heard. And I think that is one of the most important things, is, you know, giving kids a space to feel heard, because there's a lot going on. And for, you know, for kids, that comes out in different ways. Sometimes it is, you know, during a Zoom call, and sometimes, you know, you have to pick up on what's going on with the girl and then do, you know, an outside conversation. So.
And I'm wondering too that, you know, Deb, you were talking about that, you know, it's important of listening to the girls, and also listening to staff, and that a number of people were talking in the chat about, you know, the level of stress that this is causing to certainly to everyone in families and all kinds of youth serving staff who are trying to figure out how to do their work and care about and have all this caring for the young people in this uncertain time. And I'm wondering, sort of, what are you hearing coming up for your staff? And what are you finding, actually both Deb and then Shelley, what are you finding are supports for staff that have been useful?
So one thing that, you know, when I meet with the team, we go around and we say one word of how we're feeling and what's going on for us. And that is a variety of things, and it changes all the time. And I think just to know where people are and to understand that. And sometimes at the beginning of the meeting, it's one thing, and then at the end of the meeting, it's another thing, another word. And I think it's good practice for us to, I'll speak for myself, it's good practice for me to listen and hear and be non-judgmental about that. So then you go, when you're talking to the girls, you can apply that same strategy. I think that,
Deb, could you talk a little bit more that, what do you mean about that, you know, you're inviting folks in the staff to be able to share a word or two about how they're feeling, and then about responding non-judgmentally? Can you say a little bit more about what that means?
So when I first started to do it, you know, someone would say the word and I'd say, oh, okay, that's good. Or, you know, now I learned to be quiet, because people aren't looking for the response necessarily. They don't want me to solve the problem. You know, they just want to be heard. So that's just, for me, that's been a good practice in strategy there. You know, I think that, and the same thing with the girls. And I think that because we are all going through something very similar in a very different way. Each of us is different. We have that connection. I think that what we're finding is, as a staff, we are more, I want to say, more vulnerable with each other. We say what we're feeling and what we're thinking. I mean, we've always been a warm and connected organization, but I think to say, you know, I'm having a bad day. This isn't going well for me today. And then I think the other thing too is that it has allowed people to come out of their comfort zone, because we are more vulnerable with each other. And staff will say that we're more vulnerable with each other. They're more vulnerable with the girls in a safe way. And that has allowed all of us as a Girls Inc. community to get out of our comfort zone, whether it is those silly videos or just whatever that is. And I think that's changed us as an organization in a good way.
And so it sounds like a kind of a mix and a balance of being together in some ways that are just kind of light and silly, and also being together in a way where folks can share sort of, here's where, even entering in a meeting, here's what I'm feeling right now, and knowing that nobody else feels like they then have to kind of, they may feel concern and may try to, that may alert people that someone needs support, but it's not about jumping in to try to fix it. It's about just being able to be with each other in whatever we're feeling right then.
And, I think too, just the chit chat before programming starts is really important, because that's where the relationship, even as adults, I don't know about you, but I missed my coffee chit chat with my colleagues before the meeting started. And the same thing with the girls, what are you watching on Netflix? Did you go for a walk today? Here's what my brother said, kind of thing. And just building that in and kind of building a normalcy into that there are still really good things going on in the world, in their lives.
And Amber talks about that as a teacher, that they're doing Friday night Zoom chats with other teachers, really just to have that kind of social connection.
Exactly.
And Shelley, I'm wondering, what have you seen in terms of support for staff? What seems to be helpful?
It's a great question, because the emotions among staff vary widely, and even within one individual go from excitement to loss or depression and frustration. One of the things that's I think a consequence of the work that we've done over the last number of months is that, and it's a positive in the sense of the experience we've had, is that our staff has never worked more closely together than they have in the last 3 months. One of the things we realized early on, I wrote, one of the first messages I wrote to staff was that we are really first responders. We may not be in the healthcare field where we're seeing ill patients and taking care of them, but we are responding to families' needs, children's needs. We are a critical function within our society, and we have to see ourselves in that role as first responders, and that we need to work as a team. So, we will be vulnerable as well. There may be a principal or a teacher who experiences loss or is ill themselves, and we need to back each other up and to support each other. So, we've had incredible collaboration. Just a couple of examples. For example, the elementary level, teachers are regularly working as teams at a grade level and actually across district, sharing lessons. I mean, I have a variety of one of the fifth grade at West Elementary. For example, each teacher has taken a subject area and they do the videos and the lessons and design the lessons, and then all of the students in the fifth grade get that lesson. And so that all of a sudden they've gone from having one teacher to having 5 teachers that are working with them. And that has been a relief to teachers to work together in that kind of collaboration. But the sense of team has never been as strong within the school. And that applies to the middle school and the high school in terms of subject areas. People are working closely together, trying to do the best. What we've realized is you can't do this alone. This is not a circumstance, that the crisis that we're in, we can't go solo now. That we need the partnerships, and we need the relationships with each other. And so, we provide breaks for each other in a sense. We've really redesigned our high school schedule and our middle school schedule, and actually even our elementaries, to have office hours, so to speak, so that it's not just instruction on instruction and connection, but it's actually, I'm here to listen. I'm just here, and I will reach out to students during that time. I'll make calls. I'll make to parents or to students. So that kind of support within the faculty has worked. The other thing is that we have provided ongoing professional development for our staff. It's available almost every week. We've offered continuing professional development so the teachers can get better at what they're doing. One of the early frustrations is that people didn't know how to use this as a medium. And the one of the vulnerabilities about remote learning is that after working so hard to transition to more collaborative teaching, where students are working in small groups and you're differentiating instruction, your natural instinct is to go back to being teacher directed. And so how do we avoid that and move back to seeing instruction and seeing this as a collective effort on the part of students so that they are not, they're sharing knowledge with each other, they're collaborating with each other. And so we've had to work hard to say, let's relax the burden on instruction to some degree by going back to the systems that you know so well. And let's use those small groups. Let's use the time to support the small group of students or work with a small group of students. You don't have to have everything as a class. And then how do you work with colleagues so that you share the load and you're not overwhelming yourselves with trying to do everything. So that's some of the support, and at the same time, knowing that our resources, our school psychologists, our social workers, our guidance counselors are there for our teachers as well. You know, I'll be very curious to hear what comes out of our survey. We have to learn how to do this work better. You know, I am. Although I wish that we weren't facing what we'll be facing next year, I believe that we will be pressed by at least some of our instruction being remote learning on a continuing basis. And we have to get better at it so that we're not overwhelmed. And that we provide both the social emotional work and the academic work in a way that doesn't overwhelm us. So that'll be a real challenge as we walk into next year. And the lessons from this year that we have the time to reflect. You know, we're asking. Well, I'm at the end of the year. I'm going to ask teachers to do a reflective piece and send us a reflective piece on what did they learn, what insights did they have, how could we do this better, how could we help you connect with others, and how do we best support you. We need to. Knowing what we're going into next year, we need to be well prepared, and we need to hear the voice of teachers and share with us how they think they could be best supported.
And Johanny is in the chat saying, agree with you. That you raised a number of interesting points there that you know, Shelley was talking about how that in this shift to remote supports, remote learning, remote activities, that, you know, many of us in many communities have, you know, this all happened in such a short timeline. People just got something out there and did the very best they could. A lot of that was presentational, that a lot of folks started with programming that was pushing out a video, for example, which can be one very helpful tool, but it's sort of the online equivalent of a lecture. And that we know out of school time organizations are all about sort of connecting and being together and building those social relationships, that good education is about all that too. And so, and I know that Deb, that you at Girls Inc. have been sort of starting to do some reflection about from this crisis moment when everybody was just trying to do something, to look at what really seemed to be effective and what might you want to carry forward. And I'm wondering any kind of initial thoughts you've been having about that.
Yeah, so it was a total whirlwind on March 17th, and we've been doing a variety of things. We've been parent nights with parents. We've been providing homework help, academic support, and social emotional support. So a variety of things. We've done our mentoring programs, we've done our leadership programs. I think that what we're finding, and we're still figuring all of this out, that some things actually are going to work better remotely and virtually, and that could be potentially some of our mentoring programs or our leadership programs. I think that what we're looking at, some of the things that we're looking at, is how we keep kids engaged while they're on these Zoom calls. What that looks like. How do we recruit girls? What will that look like? We're having conversations around that. And then, it's going to be interesting, I think, as leaders, to support staff that is doing in-person programming, and then a combination of virtual and in programming in in the center and virtual. And I think that, you know, one of the reasons that we're looking closely at the virtual and what is working and not working is I believe that there will continue for a while to be a hybrid of types of programming, so that we have to, you know, we have to stop and reflect and think about what worked and what didn't work. And, you know, we might have to change our expectations too. You know, so the outcomes that we're going to look at might be different than if we were in person as opposed to virtual. Yeah.
Well, I've noticed a number of people in the chat talking about what you were, Deb, about let's make sure that we're aligning our outcomes and expectations with this current situation, including some folks, you know, starting to ask. I know that there is some coalitions or committees that are meeting, including with our Department of Elementary and Secondary Education has been convening some folks and really looking at what is a realistic outcome, academic outcomes for young people. I know that a lot of funders are starting to look at, you know, when funding is going out to community organizations, there may have been funding outcome expectations about X number of in-person trainings will be conducted,
Right.
So on, and that, you know, all of us, that it's important for all of us to look at the kind of policies that are in place that are really going to support effective support for young people in this context. And particularly as we're thinking about those kind of equity issues that a lot of communities were finding in this move, you know, as Deb was talking about, that, you know, it's probably going to be some mix for a while of remote supports and eventually, hopefully, in-person coming back together, that if remote supports are going to work, then all the issues about equity issues of having enough device access and having good internet access, and that all the community supports that make for an environment at home where a young person could sit with their device and engage with their mentor or their teacher and so on. That it seems like this is also lifting to the surface a lot of issues that have been there anyway.
And I think leaning into the strength of each organization. So, you know, Girls Inc. we do things well, and the Y might be doing something well over here, and we support the Y in what they're doing, and vice versa. And I think that, you know, the partnerships between schools and after school and out of school times, that this is our moment. That this is our moment to have that conversation, because we all want the same thing for our kids. And how do we support the kid, the child, the girl, both with the schools and after school, out of school time programs? And I think we've been having this conversation for this side of forever. And this is the moment to really have that conversation and make a difference in kids' lives, because resources are so limited out there. But together, we can be better.
And that goes right, Deb. What you're saying sounds much like, Shelley, you were saying just a few minutes ago about we can't do it alone.
No.
Mm-hmm. You know, I've been sort of, as we've been talking, I've been watching the chat as well. And just one observation, and this is something I think is real for all of us. You know, all of us, whether you're a superintendent, whether you're a after-school program person, or working in whatever setting, we all feel vulnerable right now. There is no way not to feel vulnerable, and particularly as we think about reopening and walking back into schools, the vulnerability increases, and our sense of, even with protective equipment, we still will feel vulnerable. And this work takes a lot of courage. As we've been talking about, that as the governor has announced in Massachusetts, we can go back into offices, and I broached the subject with my own staff, and the reluctance to go back while we're still vulnerable is just tremendous. So I think we have to work with our own feelings. I think, to bring this back around, we've talked about, children, family, our teachers. I think we have to think about ourselves too. How do we take care of ourselves? How do we let ourselves experience the vulnerability of the situation, the risk of the situation, and work with our own feelings to be able to say, I have the courage to do this. I have the courage to reach out, or here are my limits and here are my concerns, and I have to take those seriously. And to distinguish what is fear from reality, and what risks we're willing to take, and how can we best negotiate those. We have to take care of ourselves, in a sense, and I'm very conscious of all the anxiety that is present among people who are working with children right now, and people who are in essence in systems that support childcare or after-school programming or school programming. This is a very vulnerable time. And when I said we are really first responders, we are in that way. We aren't, the health professionals, but we are critical to the society functioning. If we don't take care of children, the economy doesn't work. So we are put in and we never signed up for this. None of us signed up for this. And so here we're thrust into an assignment that we didn't sign up for. We're not sure we want. We love our kids and we love working with kids, but at the same time, we are all at risk. And so it is something we need to think carefully about, and everybody needs to think carefully about, and support each other. And it's okay to ask the question, where am I now? What do I feel now? How do I feel about walking into a situation where I may be at risk and I will be vulnerable? Can I do that? And how do I do it best? There is no, and just like in any situation like this, there's no magic bullet. All the protective equipment that we provide won't protect all of us. We have to be realistic that risk is part of what we're about to enter. And whether we're willing to do that or not is a very important question. And I just want us to be conscious and have the conversation with each other, and an honest conversation with each other about what we're about to enter and how we navigate this next period of time.
Well, thank you so much, Shelley. And thank you, Deb, that this is clearly such important work that we do together. And Celeste is saying in the chat that Celeste's main takeaway is that no one will be able to work in their own silo anymore, that we have to function as a team and take on roles that we feel most successful with, and support colleagues who struggle, in this case with technology, but really all over. That all of you have talked about how out of school time, in school, community, family, that it's vital that all of us be working together to be able to provide the kind of supports that are needed in this critical time. And also to be building for a future that will not just be, as Danielle said in the beginning, not just a return to some systems that weren't really working in the first place, but really seizing this opportunity to create a society that is stronger in ways than before. And that with all the ideas that everyone was sharing in the chat today, as well as everything coming from the panel today, that clearly lots of very strong ideas, lots of very strong resources available for folks. And in terms of being able to work together to make sure that this work is really happening, we also invite folks to join with us at the Social Emotional Learning Alliance for Massachusetts. That if you'd like to know how to become more involved, I put a link in the chat. There are many different areas. We have an events committee that is planning events just like this one. We've got, and if you're coordinating social emotional learning for a district, we've got an SEL district coordinator job-alike group. If you're working in higher ed, supporting SEL, there's a group for that as well. There's an equity and inclusion committee, many different ways that you can get involved. So deep thank you to Deb Ansolian, to Shelley Berman, Sandra Lewis, Emily Ullman for this fantastic panel today. And thank you so much to Kate Shea and everyone at United Way for being such strong partners in putting together this work and also supporting SEL in communities across Massachusetts. Thank you so much, everyone, and hope you have a great rest of your day and a great weekend in this very challenging time.